Square Ball Podcast.
Hello, welcome to the show. It's brought to you in association with West Yorkshire Electrical, a fully accredited electrician that covers the whole of West Yorkshire and beyond. They do all sorts of electrical services. Your big three, as Michael might say: solar panel installation, fire alarm services, CCTV, home and business, electrical test and inspection work for your home and business. Loads of contract work with schools as well. Whatever it is that you need doing, if it's got wires in it, give West Yorkshire Electrical a shout. wyelectrical.co.uk for details. Search West Yorkshire Electrical on your socials. Phil Hay.
Hello.
It's Monday, and Leeds United, I think, are very happy, aren't we, after a super weekend down in East Anglia, getting there and back apart.
Memories of Ronaldo Vieira. Even the drive wasn't too bad. Yeah, I think there were trains cancelled and the weather was pretty dreadful. But what didn't start well finished spectacularly. Big result for Farke. I mean, going back to his old club where he's still so well thought of. I mean, loads of applause for him before the game. Lots for him afterwards when he was on the pitch as well. And quite apparent, I think, that he is held in extremely high regard there. You're never quite sure, are you? Because you're not involved with that club and because you're not around at the time when it's happening. You don't know whether or not it was a moment of time where people were happy, but, you know, it didn't really resonate. But clearly he's left a bit of a mark on the crowd. And I think people think about that more when it's not going quite so well. And the odd thing about Norwich is that the league position isn't a bad one, really isn't. But the form's not great. They dropped points at Coventry, having been ahead. They dropped points against Leeds now, having been ahead. I think what Saturday showed is that there's a pretty brittle spine to that team. And when the pressure came on after the own goal from Shane Duffy, that was the point at which you could sense Norwich getting tight. You could sense the performance going backwards. And you just felt, given the number of attacking players on the pitch, that if Leeds didn't concede again, that they actually had a good chance of winning that game. You could almost say, and Farke did say this afterwards, that they were playing to win that from 2-1 down. There wasn't a case of get a point out of this. It was a case of, if we bring this to 2-2, then it's there to be had.
And something Leeds fans recognise as well from recent times, dropping the B-bomb in again, but that's what we always did under Bielsa, was always play to win. So it was really nice to see us go back to that. And even from a losing position, you always felt we had something to get from that game.
I think you have to be realistic about the circumstances. So against Cardiff, for example, I think if the second goal had come earlier against Cardiff, that might have been another turnaround from 2-0 down. But as the game goes on and as time starts to run out, you are thinking to yourself, you know, you take anything that you can get from this. And it was the 95th minute in that first game of the season. But it was different against Norwich, I think, because the tide had turned and Norwich had gone from... I thought Norwich probably just about deserved the lead at the start of the second half, the end of the first half. Leeds had a lot of chances and definitely left them off the hook, and I don't think Norwich deserved to be 2-0 up. But as it was, they'd been pretty savvy in their tactics. They'd taken the game to Leeds, which I think is circumstances in which Leeds find it much harder to defend naturally than a lot of the games where they've been up against teams who sit deep. I think if you've got the quality and the ability... Games like Southampton, for example, and also Norwich at the weekend have shown that it's almost better to fight fire with fire against this Leeds side and to properly test their defence than it is to kind of wave on the pressure from them. But with Norwich, you kind of sense that because the own goal came early enough to leave a lot of doubt in the minds of the crowd, doubt in the minds of the players who were already under a bit of pressure, it was there to be had. And I think there were probably points of the Southampton game, even though Leeds were 3-0 down, where that became a bit questionable. But I think 3-0 is, more often than not, too big a lead to overturn. Whereas 2-0 it really is there to be exploited if the crowd turns a little bit, if the atmosphere changes. And that, the lineup towards the end of the game, the three at the back, but the front five, which was just basically everybody on the pitch, all in, everybody going for it. The commitment to getting back in the game, getting something from it, but then to win it as well. I think it did make Norwich anxious, and they stopped doing the things that they've been doing well, which was coming at Leeds, trying to put pressure on. I mean, at 1-0 down in the first half, even though Leeds were having all the chances, we were sitting in the press box saying, the thing is, Norwich look like they're going to score again at some point, which they did. But I genuinely think from the own goal onwards, you really didn't feel like anything was coming at Melié's end of the pitch.
What they were doing at times wasn't that complex, was it? It was to just stick the ball in behind us, get us on the half turn, and it seemed to be working and getting them some joy. For those of us not inside the stadium, Phil, could you sense that crowd turning, the nervousness, even at 2-1?
The crowd didn't turn in the sense that they didn't get difficult with the players. It wasn't tetchy.
I mean, but from enjoying themselves to a position of nerves.
And I think also the realisation that they were in a bit of bother and they lost control of it. And I think people could sense that Norwich weren't really going beyond halfway enough. They weren't getting forward. They weren't trying to exploit the fact that Leeds had moved to 3 at the back, so there might be a bit of space out wide. And the width had been working for them in the first half. That was where Leeds were having problems. It was, I think, quite telling that Farke decided that he was going to play Archie Gray again. A huge amount of football in a short period of time for him. And having spoken specifically on the Thursday about the minutes that Gray had with England's under-19s, I think it's fair to say not been happy with it either. To put him in the team, I think tells you, aside from anything else, how important Gray's become. But, I think you could see that Gray was a bit leggy on Saturday. I think parts of that game were much tougher for him than had been the case against Bristol City. But in the back three, he actually did well. And that change of system, even though Farke said they hadn't worked on it much, hadn't had much time to work on it, it was dead effective. It was, for an hour, out wide, Leeds just did look a little bit vulnerable. It did look like that was where the chances were going to come from for Norwich. But once Norwich stopped trying to put it on them and started to lay it on thick going forward, I do think that you felt like it was going to be Leeds' game.
Well, we ask you each show to give us a one to watch for the upcoming game, and it was Daniel Farke in this game, which is the obvious choice, I guess, returning to Norwich and all that. The person, the issue, whatever it might be, that's going to dominate the talk around a game. He was really respectful, wasn't he, in his celebrations afterwards and in the press conference and the things that he said about Norwich. And not only has he endeared himself to the Norwich fans, which he was always held in high esteem there anyway, but the Leeds fans as well, seeing that and seeing a guy who's really respectful of the place that he's been before.
Did and said the right things beforehand and afterwards.
Just strikes me as a nice bloke.
I mean, something in the press box said to me, just the sort of 4 waves to the crowd as he came out. But there was a lot of applause for him, and I think it was right to acknowledge that. These days, in my experience, for coaches and for players going back to old clubs, they're always easier if you win. Always easier if you win and it goes well. I think had 2-0 for Norwich turned into 3-0 or turned into a bit of a rout, then, it would have been far harder, really. Farke might have been able to handle it fine anyway, might have been magnanimous about it, but it's a little bit more challenging, isn't it, than when it goes your way and you come away saying, as he said afterwards, you can say all the right things like they're a good team, that was a good game for the Championship, like good advertisement, etc., etc. The bottom line for Farke is he's coming away with 3 points, a really, really big result that puts them in a strong position in the table, good position in the table, keeps the form ticking over, and I think bigger picture stuff, just avoided another bump in the road like Southampton. When you feel like you're gathering momentum and you've got impetus going and you're moving forward, that's what you have to avoid. And particularly as we keep referencing, the top of the table moving at the speed that they are. If you're going to get in the mix there and if you're going to compete with Leicester and Ipswich, then the results have to keep coming.
We did a show with Johnny Cooper from Opta over the international break, and one of the things that he highlighted was basically the chance machine that is Jorginho Rutter and Crysencio Summerville, who was very much the star turn. If Farke was your one to watch, Summerville emerged as the star turn on Saturday, didn't he? And both of them, Rutter and Summerville, instrumental in this game.
And been instrumental in the season. Rutter, I think, always had the potential to be a proper wild card in this division, the kind of cheat code thing, because he is a demonstrably talented player, and the circumstances were not great for him last season. It was hard to see in him, the £30 million investment. But there is a level eventually a player drops to where they are just going to be better than almost everybody else in the division, and the Championship is probably it for Rutter. With Summerville, I think we probably all went into this season thinking that your wild card out wide was going to be Willie Gnonto. He was going to be the player who was going to be most dangerous for Leeds and perhaps look a cut above. The problem with Gnonto has been that obviously his commitment wavered pretty severely in August. He was trying to go, he wanted to leave, put him out of the picture for a few weeks, and then he's had this ankle operation as well, which forced him to miss some more games. And because of that, or as sort of part result of that, Summerville has come more to the fore and has been increasingly impressive. I think, like quite a few players, playing at a lower level than the Premier League is going to bring his talent out more. I think as a result of that, you'll see his confidence grow. I think you've seen that with other people like Struijk as well, who really just needed to reset slightly. Summerville, I would say, was in a different position to Struijk in that he was still waiting for that really regular run of starts, that really regular run of influence. Strike's played a lot of games and I think had just kind of lost his way slightly, and this season seems to be helping him to regain it. But the thing about Summerville is he is an incredibly skillful, talented player. He's got great movement. He's quite hard to mark. He's quite hard to track. He loves to run with the ball at his feet, which is difficult to defend against. What Farke was saying afterwards was that the key for Summerville is to be more influential in terms of final impact, so chances created, good chances created, assists, goals, everything else.
Productivity, basically. Yeah.
Needed more of that this season, and it is absolutely coming. But Summerville was another player, like many, who could, I think, quite easily have forced his way out in the summer. I think if he had generally shown a lack of commitment, because Leeds were minded to sell him at the start of the summer, they did think he would be somebody they'd be cashing in on. I think if he'd been given that vibe, they would probably have said, okay, well, let's just get this done. But Farke has been able to say to him, if we get promoted this season, you're going to play this season. If we get promoted, you're going to have a big hand in it. You will have been influential. And I've seen a lot over the years with players and managers the importance of buy-in, the importance of players being invested in the ideas and the strategy of what a manager's doing. And you sometimes have circumstances where a manager has good ideas or has a good strategy, but the players aren't totally sold on it. The players don't invest as much as they need to, and therefore it doesn't really work. I think with Farke at the moment, they do seem to be invested and the buy-in does seem to be good. And I think you can see that in somebody like Summerville. Over the years, there've been chatter from time to time about Summerville's attitude about whether it's good enough, this, that and the other. But in the summer, he wasn't one of those that was going to Farke and saying, I don't want to be here. I want to go if there are offers, let me leave. And again, I came away from Norwich on Saturday thinking, Farke has a lot of good footballers in that squad. Leeds should be a good team. You should be able to make a good team out of this squad. But I still think where they are at the moment and some of the performances, pretty impressive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm always mindful of the conversation we had with KG, which was maybe a year or two back, about young black footballers being given the tag as kind of disruptive or attitude problems, because it does happen a lot, doesn't it? But there were some incidences of like ill discipline and like, well, we saw, for example, he went away for his birthday when the club had asked him not to, which was under Marsh, wasn't it? And he just posted on Instagram that he was back in the Netherlands.
With Dutch number plates on the cars behind him.
Yeah, kind of smiley thumbs up to the camera and all that. But it does seem to me like, from this distance anyway, that whether there weren't any issues, you're seeing a player there who seems a lot more focused and a lot more professional in terms of what he's doing. And in terms of the actual technical side of it, one thing I've been asking, or sort of internally asking of him anyway, is to be more productive, is to make better decisions, which is hard. Can you coach better decision making? I suppose, based on the evidence of Saturday, you can, because one thing I saw in Summerville was that he was being more decisive, wasn't he? Like the two goals that he took, he seemed to take his shots, his chances earlier. Yeah. Like when he went through, particularly for the winner, I wondered if in the past he might have got to that point and dallied and do I lay it off, and then that half second of just pausing, you get tackled, particularly when you're in the Premier League as well, and you lose the ball. But instead, he went through, he was decisive, took it back onto his right, put it in, game over.
You have this thing, don't you, when teams are missing chances, and Leeds are pretty guilty of that this season. They're scoring plenty of goals, but they're letting teams off the hook to a degree as well, which they did Norwich in the first half. You have this conversation, we used to have it with Bielsa, of what do you do about that? If the chances are falling to players, aside from just running them through finishing drills, which some coaches do, but in the benign circumstances of a training ground where there's no pressure, there's no crowd, there's no kind of instinctive moment where if you miss, there's a lot riding on it. How do you make that better, and how do you get them to improve? And I sometimes wonder whether the answer is you can't really. I suppose if you practice finishing to death, then perhaps it does become a bit more instinctive. But I do totally agree with the theory of, if a manager stood in the touchline and a player's 6 yards out and they miss the goal, like there's no way of influencing that, really, is there? You could play a different player or whatever else, but sometimes it's
going back to what Bielsa said, he always said that, didn't he? Like,
sometimes just beyond you.
You can coach them up to a point, but then it's down to them in the final moment.
Beyond your wit to do anything about it. But I think to look at Summerville, you can definitely see moments at which he either carries the ball for too long or doesn't take passes which are available to him. The things that as a really young player you develop over time and you start to learn. And I definitely do think some of that can be coached. I think some of that can be improved through coaching. And obviously the finish for the second goal was a beauty, and off the post. But what I found really interesting about the second goal and what I think was a feather in Summerville's cap was the way in which he held and he held and he held. You know, he had Gnonto unmarked. It looked to me as Summerville was coming forward down the left that the obvious ball was the pass to the back post where Gnonto's unmarked. A little bit like the Salah finish against Liverpool, you know, where you're at a bit of an angle, but the keeper's exposed and you bang it in. But Summerville kind of waited and waited and waited. And then when he saw his moment and saw that he could finish, he did. You know, it was the right decision. It was a good goal. And you'll have noticed, I think, in that moment, Summerville run into the dugout, celebrate, got cramp. You know, that's how hard he'd run himself.
Although it is fashionable now to celebrate and pretend you've got cramp or your hamstring.
Yeah, I suppose so. Maybe just trying it on. But players running to the away end as well, even though there was 4 minutes of normal time left and 8 minutes of injury time to come. I think at that point they knew they'd won it. You know, I think at that point they had that kind of confidence of feeling we've done this and they're not going to have another goal in them. It's a big result. It really is.
Returning to the formation chat, Phil, we were saying before, was it something approaching a 3-2-5 or thereabouts on the pitch? It looked like, and even Archie Gray was one of the defenders in that system, which is absolutely fantastic. Two in midfield, it looked like almost like 5 or 6 up front at any given time. Because I remember when those subs were made, it was about 70 minutes, wasn't it? I went, right, we're going for this. This should be fun. We either lose this, 5-2, or we win this. But it wasn't a Hail Mary. It was a very calculated Hail Mary, because Farke said, didn't he, in the post-match, he felt it was there to be won. He felt it was our day.
Yeah. I think it's always easier to say that after it goes right. But we probably all felt the same, actually, at 2-1, especially when Norwich started to retreat a bit and weren't really getting over the halfway line with the same impetus as they had previously. You did feel as if it was going to be a question of could they hold out? And I don't think recently the form has suggested that they necessarily would. I was asking Farke about the formation afterwards, because 3-5-2 or 3-2-5, whatever it was, is a big shift structurally and tactically from his preferred 4-2-3-1, which is pretty much what Leeds have done all the way through the season so far. And his view was that it was kind of important from the start of the season, because they'd just been relegated, because it had been a difficult summer. There'd been a lot of change in the dressing room, not to mention with Farke as head coach as well. It was important to have a kind of settled, steady system that people could feel their way into and could understand. But I sort of said to him, how much work did you do on 3-5-2, 3-2-5? Because it works in a completely different way. And he said, well, basically none on the training pitch. He said he'd spoken to, or him and his coaching staff had spoken to the players about how it would work in theory and what would happen if they had to play like that. But I think there was no time really through the international break to do it en masse, because a lot of players were away. I think as well, when you have to switch to that formation midway through a game or midway through the second half, you can't even really be sure of which players are going to be involved in it, because you have to make a lot of changes for that to happen. Who's still got some running in their legs? I asked him whether or not before the goals, given that there were so many substitutions on the cards, whether he'd been kind of tempted to withdraw Summerville, and he sort of said yes or no, but he just felt like Summerville might do something, and I think that had been quite apparent through the game. I think in the circumstances, because Norwich were starting to back off, it made it easier to work. But I still thought, again, I'd said I've been quite impressed with some of the performances so far. I thought it was, it was a good thing for Farke. It spoke highly of him that he did that, and it paid off so effectively.
Dan James as a wing-back.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, he has been mentioned, I think, before as a wing-back in dispatches, be it on like Twitter or forums, whatever. But to actually see it in the flesh and go, okay, we're doing that then, are we? But it seemed to work, didn't it? And I know he got taken off not long after that, but even still, to see him there putting in a lot of work, and that's probably the story of his season. He's done a lot more, I think, than maybe we give him credit for this season. And he does some Dan James things at times, which is possibly why he's still here and not in the Premier League. But that said, I mean, that you can't ignore like the number of goal contributions, assists and things like that, can you? Which
is the key thing, is that you need, whether or not people are brilliant from start to finish, or whether or not they have flaws, or they look like they're too good for the team, or whatever else, there needs to be a certain level of impact that justifies them being involved. And I think you are getting that from James. I actually thought, I'd tweeted just before the own goal to say this looks like it needs a freshen up. And at that point, Gnonto was getting ready, Bamford was getting ready. I wondered whether James had had a difficult 15-minute spell, I thought. I wondered whether he might get taken off, and we'll never know what was going to happen at that point. But then James keeps that ball in for the own goal, and that did absolutely change everything, because the game was meandering a little bit at that point. There wasn't enough. It was just kind of getting away from Leeds without any drama, and drama was exactly what they needed. The stamina was good as well, though. The fitness was there towards the end. That was a tough game to chase, and it required a lot of running. It required a lot of commitment, and it does change the complexion of this week. I think again, it makes, it's not to say Leeds will win at Stoke, but it makes Stoke an easier game, I think, on the basis that you're not coming off a result that again has left you quite a long way adrift of the top two, or has kind of kept you stuck in that pack of the playoff positions or behind. Leeds would do themselves a big favour by getting some real impetus now and getting some breathing space over other clubs.
Stoke, let's turn our attention to that then. Should just add, for kit geeks out there, and do go back and check out our 4-part kit special with Ed Cowburn, who designed this season's kits. Still unbeaten in the white kit, Phil?
Yes.
But it'll be blue down at Stoke, I dare say, the Peacock. So let's and we haven't won in an away kit since Brentford away. It was discovered, when we stayed up.
Yeah. Is that right?
That's right, yeah.
Wow.
All the games we've won other than that have been in white.
In white, yeah. You're right. I don't think it could be either the third kit or the home kit for Stoke. It will have to be the blue. So maybe this is the night. It's not going great for Stoke, is it?
No, 20th. The last 5 games, lost 1, lost 1. Yes.
So they have it in them from time to time, but they're not looking at this stage like a side who are going to particularly bother the playoffs. You could say the same of Huddersfield on Saturday. And these are probably actually the weeks that the critical games. So, Norwich away, I think falls into that category. Leicester, 100% Leicester away is going to fall into that category. But these are probably the weeks that are going to define how it goes for Farke this season and for Leeds. In that, if they are making the most of Stoke away, Huddersfield at home, and are doing that consistently, then they're going to be banging the running.
Yeah, 9 points in a week speaks for itself.
They absolutely are. Yeah. How much they're in the running for the top 2 is probably in the end going to come down to, can they go to Leicester and get something? If Ipswich start to wobble a little bit, can you take advantage of that? The games that, like Norwich, I think they're trying to make the point down at Norwich that before the game they were 7th, they were only 2 points and 2 positions behind Leeds. It didn't feel like they were because things haven't been going too well for them. But, if you lose to Norwich in that game, which Leeds could easily have done, the table does look different. It does, and you potentially finish the weekend 7th or 8th.
And they would have been above us.
Yeah, so there's a bit of grumbling, it's a case of we're not consistent enough. Whereas the complexion is different now, and it does set up this week in the way that, in the way that these weeks do make the table change quite a lot. It could do. It definitely could do. It was a pretty crucial result, that I feel. Yeah,
looking at Stoke's 20th position, played 12, and they've won 4, drawn only 1, and lost 7.
Yes.
So it's one or t'other by the looks of it. They've scored 13, conceded 18. Goal difference there, -5, obviously. They're on 13 points, 5 points clear of QPR in 22nd.
Well, which goes back to something you've spoken about a few times, the value of winning games as opposed to drawing games. They've lost a lot of matches, lost as many as Rotherham, who are down on 6 points, but they have managed to put wins in there. And if it is going to be a season where Stoke just need to keep themselves in the league, then winning games here and there will do that for them.
But it is another opportunity, isn't it? As most of I suppose the fixtures that you're identifying there, what you do in the other games, it's the ones that could go either way that you described as the crucial games, but actually it's all the other ones that you should win, where you need to keep those wins getting on the board, don't you? And this is one of those. I think that's probably the right way to describe it. It's one of those where you're expected to go there and win. You kind of have to, don't you? If you are to be in contention.
18-19, 19-20, 2 seasons, perfect examples of winning the games you should win and what that does for you. And actually, if you look at what went on right at the end of the 18-19 season, it was losing a game that Leeds had absolutely no business losing, Wigan at home, against 10 men when you 1-0 up, that did for them. Those days where, and then getting beat at Brentford, but Leeds, quite honestly, never had a great record at Griffin Park. And I always felt with Brentford that they played in a way that gave a lot of teams trouble and seemed to give Leeds problems constantly as well. But, that Wigan game, you win that, and that puts you on the route to automatic promotion. You lose games like that, and it does cost you. It does compromise you. So yeah, those need to be bankers. Those need to be yielding points. I think Stoke away, Huddersfield at home. Farke will be feeling like there should be a decent return from these two matches. What I think we're going to start seeing now, and what we probably need to find out, is how this is going to work when he starts to rotate certain positions. I don't get the impression from looking at him so far that he's somebody who likes to rotate religiously or do it any more than he has to. But there does surely come a week or a point where Rutter, it doesn't look like he needs to come out of the team. I think Pirro looks like he needs to come out of the team. But there maybe comes a point where...
Well, Archie Gray, for example, who's played now four times in a week.
If Gray starts at Stoke, it would surprise me slightly, although maybe he'll have recovered great through the last couple of days. But there was a lot of football in his legs all of a sudden. I think the difference with Gray is that he's 17, so you expect there to be changes there from time to time. But there will surely come a point where, even the medical department are saying, look, Rutter is kind of close to the red zone when it comes to potential injury risk. Maybe Pirro is.
Well, just expand on what the red zone is, because people might not be aware.
Well, when clubs analyse players and their fitness, they keep a good tab on and a close eye on the load, the training load, how much their muscles are being worked, how much they're under strain, how much pressure is on them. And everybody has data analysis programs which can show when a player is at more risk of an injury or less risk.
Is that based on output then?
Yeah, pretty much. It's algorithms, it's analysis of the distance you've run in training, the distance you've run in games, what you've done, broken down into things like how much of your running was sprints, how much of your running wasn't, what sort of strain that's putting on your muscles. And they can say to a coach, on any given week, this player is actually quite at risk of injury this week according to the data, so you might want to think about how you deal with him. You might want to think about whether you rest him in this game, put him back in at the weekend, whatever else. It's not to say that Rutter or Pirro or anybody else like that is actually at that point. Something tells me that Gray must have been as close as anybody at the weekend, it was like 4 90 minutes in 11 days for Gray in the end. It was tough. But if Farke does get round to a night or a day where he thinks, I do actually need to make a bit of a switch up front, then we'll get to see what his thinking is. What does he do with Bamford? What does he do with Anthony? How does he? Anthony has started already, but how does he mix it up, and how exactly does the pecking order look?
Just looking at Stoke's results, actually, they've beaten. Their 4 wins came against Rotherham, who are obviously very low in the table. You got Watford, who are 19th. Bristol City was one of the more eye-opening ones. They're 8th at the minute. And then Sunderland, the most recent winner, were in the playoffs and were sort of been knocking around the same part of the table that we have, Phil. But they have already lost to Ipswich, Leicester and Preston, the teams that have made the early running. So can we read too much into that?
It's not as if it's been an easy fixture list. I think it tells you that Stoke probably do have it on their day. But that it is the sort of form that suggests that if 20th isn't a fair reflection of them as a team or what's gone on, somewhere around about mid-table might be more realistic. I don't think you'd be looking at Stoke at the moment and thinking they'll be chapping on 6th place when the season ends. Saying that, I wouldn't have said the division is particularly settled down yet either. It's very, very tight. I think, 2 points from 6th down to 12th, 13th, 14th.
Yeah, so you've got Sunderland on 19 points, and then you've got Swansea 17th on 15, so there's a very small spread, yeah.
So it kind of means that Blackburn in 15th could easily bounce, to the verge of the playoffs with one result. It really is that close. But certainly at the top, I think the division will be starting to look at Leicester, Ipswich and Leeds and saying they've had good starts, all of them. As I say, Leeds have come through a pretty difficult first month to get themselves into this position. I think it's been good work by Farke. Honestly, do I think he's got this team settled now. They definitely look happy with the way they're playing and what they're doing. It's not like it's always perfect. It's not like it isn't failing in some respects. The opening goal shaped the game for 60 minutes at Carrow Road, and it was so soft, that corner into the near post. But a lot of it's been really good. And to go back to the point about buy-in, I think you're really getting that from a lot of the players.
Yeah, in the sense that in so many games we are just in a really simple way better than the opposition. We've got better players, we've got more options off the bench, because the Norwich commentators, for example, that were on their iFollow service at the weekend were bemoaning the fact that they just did not have the options from the bench that Leeds had. They were actually sort of marvelling in the options that we did have, like being able to bring on Bamford and the other players that came on at around that same time, just to chuck it all at trying to win the game, and it worked. When they just said we just don't have the same options,
which is the turnaround, isn't it, from the middle of August, when that was exactly the position Leeds were in, that there wasn't choice on the bench. In part, there wasn't choice because you had two players in Sinisterra and Nonto who were still there but were out of the picture because of circumstances. But that bench on Saturday was really strong. And I think when with like an hour gone, I was kind of tweeting saying this looks like it could do with a freshen up. This looks like it could do with a change. It wasn't a case of you're just going to have to throw some people on and see what happens here. You could actually make proper strategic tactical switches with what was on the bench, because there's some really good players on there, really strong, dangerous players. I think already you've seen a good spread of goals throughout the team, and I think you're going to see that right the way to the end of the season. Farke was talking when he was on about Pirro, about, Golden Boot, who scores 20 goals a season, this, that and the other. It's not to say anybody will do, but I think the years where you've had a couple of people going past 10, I think it'll be different this time round. I think there'll be plenty. It'd
be nice if we had about 5 or 6 players or got 15 or more, wouldn't it? I wouldn't mind that.
If you had that, you'd be winning the title or thereabouts. Although it has to be said, Leicester are getting into record-breaking territory now with their form. I think you have to be respectful of that and say they've been terrific.
I would accept second place, Phil. If that's what it's to be, I'll take it. It's fine.
Well, you can hardly argue with the side who are on their points tally at this point, can you?
No.
That doesn't happen by chance. I was actually watching some of their highlights before the game at Carrow Road, and they just looked as if they were strolling. I'm sure in periods of games it's been difficult. It's not like they haven't lost any. They did lose that game to Hull, but some of the highlights and the goals they were scoring, they were making it look very, very easy.
What do you know about Stoke then, as we head in towards that one? I'm just looking down their squad. There's a lot of grizzled Championship bastards in there. They've got a certain Lewis Baker. No appearances so far this season. Is he injured?
He had knee surgery, did Baker, a little while ago. You're probably right about them being fairly grizzled. In terms of like formations and tactics and so on, I don't think anything out of the ordinary at all. I think it'll be quite familiar in comparison to what we've seen from the Championship so far. Leeds away from home, I think it's a dilemma, isn't it, for opposition manager to know exactly how to deal with it. At Elland Road, you can definitely get away with sitting deep, being compact. I think as well, as Leeds form develops and if it keeps on getting better, your own support completely understand that you're kind of playing the percentages and trying to be sensible about the odds in a game like that. But it isn't. I mean, we saw this even with Bielsa. With a home crowd, it is tricky because home crowd don't particularly like to see their team being defensive, don't like to see the team being passive. They do want to see a bit of aggression. They do want to see the team having a go, but it does expose you against Leeds, partly because of the range of attacking ability in the squad, but also because of the pace of it. I think that again is what you were seeing with Summerville on Saturday. You lose track of somebody like him, you lose track of somebody like Nonto. Ruter as well is pretty quick, and it's hard to manage that.
What's your feeling about this one then? Another win for Leeds on the board? I mean, look, I think let's be fair about it. It should be, shouldn't it, given the relative league positions and the relative form. What's the unknown factor we need to look at here?
I think the unknown factor, and this will be the case right the way through the season, is that when you bounce into the weeks of 3 games in 8 days, 3 games in a week, it does put a certain amount of strain on. It does put a certain amount of pressure on. It can throw up some odd results. They've got the game against Huddersfield coming at the weekend as well, so turnaround time isn't absolutely massive, which is another reason why Farke might have to think about who he protects a little bit, who he's cautious with. It's going to be pretty crucial team selection for both games, just getting that right. And you would assume that it's not going to be easy to just do the same 11 all the way through. This is when you really need to use your squad. So, for example, does Gray come out the team? Does Anthony go in for one of the wingers? Does Bamford get a chance? I think Farke will be loath to change it much. I really think he'll be happy with how it's settled at the moment. But these weeks are always a little bit questionable because no matter how good you are, it's quite easy for the football to catch up with you in the Championship. Yeah.
Just occasionally it just throws up a random game that you don't expect, doesn't it?
But or finds you a little bit jaded, a little bit off colour. I think Southampton was like that. I went to Southampton thinking it would be close, that Leeds would potentially have the beating of them, that the circumstances might be good for Leeds to exploit. And they just felt a yard behind. It felt sleepy. I always felt that on Saturday to begin with as well. I mean, as it happened on the Friday, they weren't able to fly down from Leeds Bradford because there was an incident with another plane there, so they had to get the coach down to Norwich, which took a long time, and they got in really late. You know, it's not ideal at all, but it was just a little bit off colour. But they had the means to dig it out, and I think the reason they were able to dig it out in no small way was because even though it went to 2-0, it didn't get out of hand in the way that it did at Southampton.
One to watch for the Stoke game? Is it rotation? Is it the issue rather than the player?
Yeah, I guess us starting to get a feel for how Farke does handle a really busy fixture list. Is he going to commit to the same players over and over and over again, or will he mix it up? And if he does mix it up, and might be totally justified in doing that on a physical basis, does it work for him? I think that is probably actually what will really mark Leeds out as serious contenders, and to a degree has already, is the ability to change things without there being, a massive, without the house cards coming down. I thought, away at Southampton, there was no road on. There was Cooper in defence. The defence didn't defend as well as it could have done. 3-0 down early on. I think the dream ticket for a manager always is that you take one player out, you put another player in, and you barely see a difference.
With 3 wins on the bounce, then it's hard to escape the feeling that some momentum's building now.
Yeah,
and another couple to make it sort of maybe 4 or 5 starts to then mark you out as that team that's going to be there or thereabouts.
And it also opens up space behind you, because it's quite hard to be ultra consistent in the Championship because the level is so even. And because the standard is so even among a lot of the clubs in it. The various games that are tight can go either way, and if you're one of the sides who, like Leicester, are putting win after win after win on the board, before you know it, there's some open water behind you. I mean, Leicester are in a fantastic position. It seems so difficult to imagine now that they're not going to go up after this start.
If only just because the number of points they've got on the board. Yeah. Even if they did a full-on Leeds United, 2010 collapse in the second half of the season, it'd still probably go up at a canter.
Well, you start to think, don't you, about what the form that other teams would have to conjure in order to close in, but more to the point, the sort of form that Leicester would have to throw in order to make that gap closable in the first place. Anyway, they're in great shape. But if I was Leeds, I would not be unhappy.
Well, then we'll get back together at the end of the week and we'll analyse it. Michael will join us for that one, for another dose of Phil here on the Square Ball Podcast. We'll catch you then.
The Square Ball Podcast.